Right, so today we're going to look at some wordy problems, and each wordy problem will involve ratio in one way or another. You've already seen how to simplify ratios, and I know some of you got onto the questions from the textbook where you had to add the parts together and then you say a total number of parts, etc., etc. You can always rewatch the end of the last video if you haven't tried that bit yet. I'm going to show you some more examples. I'm going to try showing you that you don't always need to add things together at the beginning of these problems. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Let's have a look at this particular question then. So Jim makes rugs to order. A particular black and white rug needs to have a surface area of 0.36 meters squared. So it's not a particularly big rug. Some of it is black and some of it is white. The rug is split into 9 parts. 4 of those 9 parts are black and 5 of those 9 parts are white. And I want to know, of this total, how much of it is black? What is the area of black material that Jim needs for this particular rug? Okay, so every single time you will want to make a statement that says a number of parts equals a number. So in this question, it will be a number of parts equals this number here. This is the total area of the rug. Because it's the total area of the rug, I need the total number of parts. So the black parts and the white parts together, that's 9 parts. The rug is made of 9 parts, and that is 0.36 square meters of area. Because the question's asking for the area of black material that's required, I eventually want to work out what 4 parts is worth, because that's the order it goes in, isn't it? It's black, then white. So I will eventually want to work out what 4 parts is. But to get to 4 parts, I'll start by taking it down to 1 part. So let's divide both sides by 9 to get 1 part. You could use a calculator if you like, but that's not too bad, because I know 36 divided by 9 is 4, so 0.36 divided by 9 is 0.04. Like I say, you can use a calculator there if you like, and the step we've done is just divide both sides by 9 to get from 9 parts down to 1 part. And the black material is 4 parts, so to get from 1 part to 4 parts, we're going to multiply by 4. And again, you can use a calculator if you like. That's not banned today. You're very welcome to use a calculator, but I can do 4 times 4 is 16 in my head. So it's going to be 0.16 square meters. So some of those important numbers, you've got 0.36 is the total area of the rug. So that's all 9 parts of it. If you divide by 9, you work out what 1 part is worth. But the black is not just 1 part, it's 4 parts. So multiply up by 4 to get the total area there. This question hasn't asked for it, but if I wanted to know the area of white, you've got 2 ways of doing it. You could just work out 5 parts. So this question's not asking for it here, but if you work out 5 parts, you get the white material that's required, don't you? And the easiest way of doing that is to get from the 1 part to the 5 parts directly by multiplying by 5. 0.04 multiplied by 5 is 0.2, or 0.20 if it helps you to see it clearer. So 0.2 square meters. The other way you could have found the white is, so well, if the total area is 0.36 and that's how much black I've got, I'll just take it away. And indeed 0.36 take away 0.16 does give you 0.2 or 0.20. So you've just seen a question there where once again it was necessary to do some adding. I'd like to show you the twists that will happen now where you don't necessarily need to do any adding, and you know whether to add or not, whether just by looking for key information in the question. So in that last question it was the total area of the rug, so total, I had to add the parts together. Let's look at this different situation then. This time I've got Grace and Jill going on a road trip. They're going to share the driving. They're not just doing half each, because if Grace was doing half the driving and Jill was doing the other half, that would be a ratio 1 to 1. Split the driving into 2 parts. Grace does 1 part, Jill does the other part. So they're not splitting it equally. Looks like Jill is going to do a little bit more. We've got Grace here and Jill here. So that Jill will drive for longer than Grace. So I know it's that way round because Jill is the bigger number. Jill is driving for longer than Grace. Ultimately, I want to know how much just Grace is doing. We could work out how many hours driving they're both doing, but the question is asking for how much driving does Grace do. Now, the only other number I have in this question is the number 15. And let's think about what that means. This 15 is not the total amount of driving that's happening. I don't actually know that yet. So there's no point in adding these together. If you add them together, you get 27, but there's no point in doing that because this 15 is not the total amount of driving that they do between them. Okay, it's not what they do together. Instead, this 15 is how much more Grace does than Jill. So, sorry, Jill does than Grace, my apologies. Now, the difference in the number of parts is 5, and the difference in the hours of driving is 15. So to make this question work, when I'm setting this up where I've got a number of parts equals some other number, it's actually 5 parts equals 15 hours. Okay, because that's the difference between how much driving they do. Grace does a bit more. How much more does Grace do? She does 15 hours more. It's the difference between how much driving they do. And the difference in the number of parts is 5. Okay, Jill's doing 5 more parts than Grace, because 16 is 5 bigger than 11. Now it's the same as before. If 5 parts equals 15, I'll take this down to 1 part first of all. Ultimately, I want to know Grace, which is 11 parts, but let's take it down to 1 part first. And I do that by dividing by 5. Now, you can do that on the calculator if you like, but hopefully there's no need. 15 divided by 5 is 3. Okay, so 1 part here is worth 3 hours. And Grace drives for 11 parts. So let's multiply that by 11. 3 times 11 is 33 hours. So that's the answer. Grace drives for 33 hours on their road trip. This question didn't ask for it, but if you multiplied 3 by 16, you'd get 48, and that's how many hours Jill is driving for. And indeed, if you do 48, take 33, you do get that difference of 15. So it's definitely the correct answer. You can always do these little checks to see if you've got them right at the end. So that was an example where it was necessary to subtract the number of parts that are given in the ratio. Right, now finally, this is a different example again where we've got a recipe for dough. Now the dough is made just of flour and water. It's a very simple dough, and order it is in using cups in the ratio 5:3 flour to water. So it's 5 parts flour, 3 parts water. That's the order it goes in. Betty wants to make a batch of dough, and she's got 8 cups of flour to use. So I need to know, well, how much water should go with these 8 cups so it's in the right ratio, so we make the dough correctly. Now remember, the very first question we did, the number in the question, which was 0.36 meters squared, that represented the total area of the rug, so we added. In the last question I showed you, the number in the question was 15 hours, but that was the difference between how much they drive, so we had to subtract. In this question, we don't need to do either. There's no need to add, and there's no need to subtract, because we're told that 8 cups is how much flour, and that is automatically 5 parts. Look, the flour is 5 parts when the water is 3 parts. So I don't need to add those, I don't need to subtract those. I just say, well, I know the flour is 5 parts of the recipe because it says here. So I've got that 5 parts is 8 cups. That's an American thing, isn't it? We tend to use grams or ounces or something when we make our cakes or our doughs. But the Americans have a shortcut. They just scoop them out with cups. Very efficient. So I've got the number of parts that just by looking at the ratio. I didn't need to add the ratio together. I didn't need to subtract them. I just saw that the flour is 5 parts and wrote that down. 5 parts is the 8 cups. I am interested in how much water I should be using. Okay, how much water should I be using? Now, water is 3 parts of the recipe. So let's take this down to 1 part. Okay, 8 divided by 5 doesn't go exactly. You can use a calculator if you like. It's not too bad, 8 divided by 5. I think it's 1.6, isn't it? But let's just do it to make sure. Yeah, 8 divided by 5 is 1.6. So 1 part is worth 1.6 cups. But remember, the water is 3 parts. Okay, we need 3 parts for the water. So let's multiply by 3. 1.6 multiplied by 3 is 4.8. And that's my answer. I need 4.8 cups of water. First step, was to write down 5 parts because it was the amount of flour. We divided that by 5 to get 1 part, and to get it up to the water, which was 3 parts, we multiplied by 3. So here's all those questions again. You have to be good at reading the language of the question and trying to work out what do you do to write down that first step. In every single case, we always wrote down something like a number of parts equals, or a number of parts equals. We always did that, but sometimes we have to add, sometimes we subtract, sometimes we don't have to do either. And it's all found by reading the question really, really carefully. So in this question, that was the total area of the rug. Right, that was a total. So of course you're going to add them. We're doing 4 plus 5 to get the number of parts. In this question, the 15 wasn't a total. The 15 was how much longer Jill was driving than Grace. So that was the difference. Therefore, because that's a difference, sorry, the 15 is the difference, it's necessary to find the difference here. 16 take away 11 is 5 parts, blah, blah, blah. And in this last one, there was no need to add or subtract. We're just told that the flour is 5 parts. So I automatically get 5 parts equal, etc., etc. Because you sometimes add, sometimes subtract, and sometimes don't need to do either, these questions are harder than yesterday. So what I'd like you to do, please, is to start today's lesson by finishing anything that you didn't manage to finish last lesson. So I'll upload that to the Google Classroom again, and I'll explain that. So there are 2 exercises, both from the textbook, exercise 16 and exercise 17. The stuff I'm explaining here is really about exercise 17, where it's all mixed up, and exercise 16 was just things like this. But I know some of you finished that last lesson, and some of you didn't start that last lesson. That's okay, I don't mind you working at different paces, but I'm suggesting that if you didn't get round to doing lots of questions like this last lesson, I would start there if I were you. That's exercise 16, where in every single one you need to add. And I've got some more examples that are like that at the end of my last video. I'll link it again if you want to see that. Right, very best of luck with these.